Good morning, class. Hope you're having a good day. We are nearing the end. I know I say that here about every time we meet of late, but it's getting more and more true, is it not? So a couple more weeks of class, I suppose, after this one, and then we have final exams. So that's going to be here before you know it. So anyway, we last time kind of wrapped up chapter 14 where we were talking about cost of production. I want to mention one thing regarding that. Most of what we focused on was in the short run, but not everything. Okay, so of course, again, economists define the short run versus the long run differently than perhaps other people do, but short run is not defined or bounded by some arbitrary length of time or anything like that. The short run is the period over which you have at least one fixed input. Okay, so it could be some measure of capital like floor space in a factory or number of machines on the factory floor. Something you can't fix, okay, in the short run, okay? So it's only in the long run you can change all your inputs. So we talked about that and we said, well, in the short run, you will always have these cost curves that we looked at last time, these U-shaped curves. We'll go back over here in just a minute. But their shape, if you will, on the kind of the far end when you're getting into large levels of production, their shape in that all those curves tend to go up, except for the average fixed cost curve, is a product of diminishing marginal returns to labor or just simply diminishing marginal product. I want to mention that here just to make sure we have the terminology straight. When we say diminishing marginal product, of course, we mean that each additional unit of the variable input may provide additional output, but at a decreasing rate. Okay, so we, for instance, we looked at some examples of that some time back. The cord here, I gotta fix my cord. Uh-oh, there went my mic, right? Okay, so let me get this straight. Okay, so hopefully my mic's still working here. Okay, so that's what gave this convex shape, if you will, to the marginal cost and average cost curves and so forth. Diminishing marginal product, that's the term your book uses for really, you'll hear it elsewhere called diminishing returns to labor or whatever the variable input is, okay? Usually it's labor, okay? I mention that because you don't want to confuse that term. You will hear that elsewhere. I mean, our book uses diminishing marginal product, and that's it. But in other books or other venues where you discuss cost of production, you may hear the term diminishing returns to labor and so forth. So the thing is diminishing, I want to make sure we all understand that diminishing returns to whatever it is, could be labor or whatever. This is a short run concept, okay? This is a phenomenon that's forced upon us in the short run because we have only so much capital, say, to work with for each unit of labor. So at some point, remember our little illustration in the factory, if you keep adding bodies to the factory, to increase output, well, then at some point you have very little capital to distribute with each body, okay? So diminishing returns to labor is a short run concept. Yes, Riley. Riley has a question.
Because I forget if we've talked about diminishing returns to scale also.
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing this up, actually. Okay, you're anticipating where I'm going.
Okay.
Let me finish this and we'll see if I'm answering your question, okay? Mm-hmm. So yes, the thing is, the word returns here, I think, it can cause some confusion. And I wanted to make sure we don't have that confusion. So I appreciate that question quite a bit. So first off, it was this short run concept that caused these curves to have their upward slope here, at least these three curves here, as you push quantity of labor out to increase output. Okay, so that's something different than decreasing returns to scale or any kind of returns to scale. So we talked about, you might hear the term decreasing or increasing or constant, doesn't matter, but returns to scale, okay? So when you hear that, this is a long run concept, okay? This is something that applies to a factory or a production facility in the long run. So you see here, I got my book all marked up here, but we address that here in this section in the long run. And I know it's really marked up here because as we were talking about this, but the idea here, of course, is there are no fixed inputs in the long run. So if you double, say, your inputs, do you double or more than double or less than double your output? And that would define whether you're experiencing economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and constant returns to scale. Sometimes we'll talk about increasing returns to scale. It's synonymous with economies of scale. Increasing returns to scale means basically if you double all of your inputs, then you'll more than double your output. Or maybe you don't have enough room to double all your inputs, so you increase all of your inputs by 10%, you'll increase your output by more than 10%, okay? So if you hear increasing, or on the far end of the long run average total cost curve over here, you may experience decreasing returns to scale, aka diseconomies of scale. With diseconomies of scale, again, a 10% increase in all of your inputs would generate a less than 10% increase in output. And that's going to drive your long run average total cost curve up, okay? So if you hear decreasing returns to scale, this is synonymous with diseconomies of scale, which is the long run concept. Okay, so I wanted to mention that, okay? Make sure you understand the terminology there. Sometimes that's confusing to students. But when you hear diminishing returns to labor, the idea, or something like that, the idea is that's your only variable input. But when you hear scale, okay, returns to scale, we're then in the long run when you have enough time to vary all of your inputs. Okay, so that was chapter 14. I wanted to go to chapter 15 today, if we could. And we're going to talk about firms and perfect competition. And we all have a notion of what a market is when it's not competitive and so forth. So, I've related more than once my background back there of growing up in a small town where there was only one grocery store, and everyone said that there was not enough competition. So we're going to talk about competitive markets. In particular, we're going to talk about what's called perfect competition, because there's different degrees of competition. Perfect competition is the most competitive market structure you can consider. So we're into something now. For the remainder of the course, we'll be talking about what's called market structures, okay, or kind of an industrial organization concept here, where you have many firms, or at least one, okay? You can't have zero firms, okay? That wouldn't be very interesting, but at least one firm. One firm in an industry would be a monopoly. One seller is a monopoly. One buyer is called a monopsony, okay, if you have one buyer. But if you have many suppliers or many sellers, you get into a more competitive situation on the supply or demand side of the market. In particular, what we're going to look at here in chapter 15 are competitive markets with many buyers and many sellers. Okay, it says here, in particular, many sellers, I think, but here's a market with many buyers and sellers trading identical products so that each buyer and seller is a price taker. And in your text, they give you some traits or defining characteristics of a competitive, in particular, a perfectly competitive market. Okay, if you have enough buyers and sellers, it's said to be perfectly competitive. So first off, you got to have many buyers and sellers. Okay, many buyers and sellers. Now, I use this a lot, but this example a lot, but wheat farming. So forgive me if I get into this a lot, but agricultural markets, many of them, most of them, if not almost all of them, are very competitive, okay? But even wheat farming, and I say even wheat farming because you had some big wheat farmers in the heartland of the United States. So in Kansas, Nebraska, and you have big corn farmers and so forth. These farmers own thousands of acres. You have corporate farms and so forth. But you can imagine someone with 500,000 acres in the middle of Nebraska. The thing is, they are operating in a very competitive market because they're just one of many. Even though they're the largest in the world, perhaps, with 500,000 acres, they're just one of many sellers. Okay, and so we're going to see there's certain constraints that kick in because of that, because they're just one of many. The goods offered by the various sellers are largely the same. So sometimes we talk about homogeneous, and I want to use that word here, homogeneous products, okay? So first off, that wheat farmer, okay, can't say that their wheat's special, okay? So my wheat's special out here, and so we're going to command a particular, a higher price than everybody else who takes their grain to market, wherever that might be. By definition, a perfect competition has to have a homogeneous product, and that seems to model a lot of situations. And because of that, because you have many buyers and many sellers, the sellers in particular, but also the buyers, I guess, buyers and sellers, but in particular, we're going to be looking at the selling side of this today. The sellers are said to be buyers and sellers are said to be price takers. Okay, if you're a price taker, a wheat farmer is not going to say, you know what, price of wheat's kind of low per bushel. I don't know what wheat sells for per bushel. Let's say it's $2.50 a bushel, and a farmer says, that's kind of low. I think I want to do my part to drive up the price of wheat, so I'm just not going to harvest my wheat this year. That would be a ludicrous thing to do, because even the biggest wheat farmer in the world doesn't make enough wheat to affect the price of wheat on the market by the amount that they bring to market. They can't drive the price down by taking a lot to market. They can't drive the price up by keeping their produce off the market. Okay, so buyers and sellers, but sellers we'll study today are price takers. That is to say, they have no market power. No market power. Market power is the ability to raise your price without losing market share. All right, so they don't have any. So the thing is, with no market power, if a wheat farmer says, my wheat's special, it's just right here in the middle of Nebraska and got just the right nutrients or something, so mine should sell for a little higher price. Well, they may insist on that, but guess what? They're not going to sell any. Okay, they're not going to sell any of their wheat because there's identical wheat around the world. Okay, and broad classes. I know there's different strains of wheat, but generally speaking, they're still just a little guy or gal in the big world, so they're not going to be able to affect the price. Okay, and then firms can freely enter and exit. So you have free entry and exit. The idea here is that no one, say, has a patent on this product, so no one has a particular license or anything that excludes other people. There's low barriers to entry. Might be another way of putting this, okay? So, agricultural products in particular exhibit perfect competition because, if you got some acreage, you can go into farming and so forth. Now, there are maybe some natural barriers. I mean, it takes, we're going to explore this later in something called natural monopolies. So to really do wheat farming efficiently, it does help to have a lot of acreage, and so that's kind of a barrier in itself, kind of an economic barrier, but it's not, there's no artificial barriers to entry, okay? So if you got a bunch of acreage, you can go into wheat farming if you want and so forth. Lots of things like that, okay? So especially agricultural markets, but also, lots of manufacturing situations are competitive. It's amazing when you go out on the internet and you're looking for any particular good, that you want to consume. There may be lots of producers out there. Just tables like we have here in the classroom tables. There's lots of companies that produce these things. Yes, Seth.
Is perfect competition even attainable?
Oh, okay. Is it even attainable? This is a concept, I guess, if you will. Technically, the answer there would be no. Okay, because, it just maybe you can't measure the degree of market power. It may be so small. That's the idea. You're right. So it's kind of an ideal, if you will, or concept. But no, there's really, the only thing that might come close is, because even when I talk about wheat farming, again, you gotta have some acreage to do that. And so, one farmer could not significantly, but just in a minuscule way affect the price of wheat. But something with low barriers to entry and so forth. So I use that example of landscaping a lot of times, right? So you can go into that with minimal amount of capital. Or screen printing, screen printing, t-shirt printing, So you can imagine, on spring break going down to Padre Island, and all the college students are down there, and you might say, well, I want to make some money. I got my screen printing thing here, and I'm going to make shirts for people, and just kind of, tailor it for their wants. That would be very competitive. But still, there's a little barrier to entry. If you were to raise your price, guess what? You're probably going to have some competition. So.
Well, I just kept thinking about Monsanto and how they kind of control
they're big, aren't they?
Entirely pretty much.
Well, there aren't very many companies like Monsanto, or there's a few, but not very many. So in that case, you're up the chain a little bit. You're more into a company there. They do own lots of acreage. Monsanto does, farms and so forth. But still, I think it's pretty competitive. But they're more of the supply chain is in Monsanto, isn't it? So distribution and so forth. Okay, so this is perfect competition. So the ideal here, they give, first off, an example of a firm in perfect competition here in your text on page 289. And the question is basically, looking at these things here, is how much should this particular firm produce to maximize their profit? That's what you want to maximize. You don't want to maximize revenue. Some people think that, instead you want to maximize profit, okay? So we're going to see how to complete this table out with additional columns here in a little bit, but this is for a perfectly competitive firm. Here you have average total and marginal revenue, which is one side of the profit equation here. And this is a perfectly competitive situation. I guess this is one that produces milk. It's a dairy. And so these are gallons here, but it could be in units of 1,000 gallons or something. You'll notice here that the price just sits there. Okay, the price just sits there. This is a price taker. They take $6 a gallon for their dairy, their milk that they bring to market. So when you see this happen here for any level of output for a producer, you're in perfect competition. This is a price taker. The total revenue is price times quantity, it's PQ. Average revenue would be total revenue divided by quantity. So they give you the little formula there, if you will. So like for 2 gallons, total revenue is 2 times 6 is 12, and then you divide by the price. You're back down to 6 again here for average revenue. And then you'll notice the marginal revenue, which is the difference between these, is 6, okay? So it's the change in total revenue divided by the change in units. So average revenue and price are the same thing here. Notice that. And so that's not going to change at all. Yes, Riley.
Well, that was my question.
Oh, is that your question? Yeah. Okay, so you observed something here that we're going to come back to in a minute. This is another feature, if you will, of perfect competition. Not only is the price constant, but the price and the average revenue are the same, okay? Because, you know, the total revenue is price times quantity. So if you think about it again, average revenue is total revenue divided by quantity. Total revenue is price times quantity, then of course quantity cancels out here. So that works in this particular market structure, okay? Price and average revenue are going to be the same. So the average revenue curve here for an individual supplier, okay, is not really, okay, the average revenue, okay, it's going to be a constant curve, okay? All right. Okay, so why is that? In fact, one more thing here, surprising, is that these two will always be the same as well. So you got three columns here that are identical. That's true in perfect competition, will not be true in any other market structure that we look at. Price, average revenue, marginal revenue are all the same thing. Okay, so why is that? Let's look at a diagram here. I want to sketch something out for us here today. I'm going to draw two supply and demand graphs here. We already know kind of what to expect from a market for wheat or what have you. There's a supply and demand curve, supply and demand. And this is going to be capital Q because that's the quantity on the market, and this is price here. Okay, so this is old hat here, but you know, this establishes the equilibrium quantity, EQEQ, and the equilibrium price, PEQ. And so this is the market here. This is a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so the idea is there's many suppliers here that form this supply curve. And so remember, you horizontally add the individual supply curves. We're going to look at that in a little more detail in a little bit, what those individual supply curves are. But you horizontally add those to get the market supply curve. And so it turns out then, I can come over here and look at the individual, okay, the individual supplier. So I want to use a small q here, price, same price here. And you realize that the individual supplier, maybe the individual wheat farmer, has to accept the price that's set in the marketplace. Whatever that price is determined in the marketplace is the price they have to accept for each quantity. It doesn't matter which. If we look at our table here, by the way, I mean, you'll notice for quantities of 1, 2, all the way up to 8 here, it doesn't matter, then the price is always the same. So we're going to look at, why is this table, why does it have this shape here? Well, the price is going to be constant here for the individual supplier. So it doesn't matter whether they bring to market 1, 2, 3, or however many units or thousands of units, they accept the same price. Okay? Not only that, but I'm going to claim here that this curve also equals the marginal revenue curve and the average revenue curve, AR and MR, both of these. All three things are represented by this horizontal line whose position here is determined by the intersection of these two curves in the marketplace. So let's look at why each of these things are true first off. Okay, so maybe average revenue for a second. Spend a little time with this. Average revenue, okay, so what if I wanted to find the average revenue for 3 units? Okay, so let's find the average revenue at Q equal to 3 units. And then I need to put a price on here to do that. And so they're using the price of $6, I believe. So let's just put 6 there. Okay, so what's average revenue at 3 units? It's total revenue. Total revenue is equal to price, 6 times 3 units, right? So this is $18 is the total revenue. So the average revenue is the total revenue divided by the price, which is 18 divided by 6. No, that's not right. Quantity, I'm sorry. Duh. Q, okay, let's use a Q here. So it's total revenue divided by the quantity. I guess I need to wake up. Is it Monday? No, it's Tuesday. Okay, so it's 18 divided by 3, which is $6. Okay, so average revenue is $6. It's the same as the price because again, the average revenue is the price times the quantity. I'm going to use Q here. It doesn't matter. But the quantities cancel out. Okay, it's that simple. Okay, so in perfect competition, the average revenue equals the price. So I'm going to put a little bar over these because that means they're constant here. Okay, so they're never going to change. Also, I mean, we can do numbers here in the table, but it doesn't matter. We did this one here, really, in that little computation. But the marginal revenue associated with the third unit, it's also 6 for this same reason. If you build this table out, it's going to be the same. So this numerically shows what we're observing here in our graph. Another way of looking at this, okay, is that total revenue is always, okay, area inscribed within a demand curve. In this case, we did it before with when we looked at the market, we looked at the revenue rectangle associated with the market demand curve. Y'all remember us doing that before? I draw a rectangle like this, we'd find the area. For an individual supplier, the same concept applies. The individual revenue is the area of this rectangle here. Okay, that's an important thing for us to note, okay? We'll be using that later. So that is the total revenue. That's the total revenue. If I said average revenue, I mean total revenue. That's what I meant. That's total revenue. So you divide by the quantity, you're going to get the price because the quantity is the length of this rectangle here. So you take the area, divide by the length, you're going to get the height. So it's going to be the price. Additionally, this is a very important thing to see, what I'm going to do next. The marginal revenue is the price. We see this graphically as well. What is the marginal revenue of the, let's do the fourth unit. Doesn't matter whether we do the third or fourth. So remember marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. Let's use a small q here. Okay, so if I go from 3 to 4, if I find the marginal revenue of the fourth unit, I'll just put a subscript 4 here, then this is the total revenue of the fourth unit minus the total revenue associated with the third unit. It's the change in total revenue when I go from 3 to 4 units. So all I'm going to do when I do that to compute the change in total revenue is to expand that rectangle by adding on this amount right here. That would have to be the change in total revenue, right? Wouldn't that be the change in total revenue? Is the little extra I add on to that. And so, you know, what is this? This is 1 by 4. 1 times 4. I know that seems a little ridiculous, but I'm going to write it that way for a reason. It's 1 unit times $4, or $4 times 1 unit. And I'm going to divide by the change in quantity, which is 1 unit, okay? So this is 1 from here to here, 1 unit. So the area of the rectangle is 1 by 4, and so we divide by the length of this rectangle, which is 1. 6, you're right. I don't know where 4 came from. Thank you, Riley. I appreciate that. 6. 1 by 6, thank you. 1 times 6 is 6. So the area of this little add-on here is going to be 6 square units. And so that's going to be your marginal revenue is 6, okay? Now you say, well, big deal. Okay, that's kind of obvious. See, you're going to see in other market structures when you have what's called an individual demand curve, which is what this is. I'll put that label on here in a minute. When it slopes downward, then these properties we're observing don't apply. And that will happen in other market structures like monopoly and so forth. Okay, so let me back off here. And there's another term for this curve, okay? It's not only the price, marginal revenue, and average revenue, but because this curve gives the price that the market will offer for each unit of output, that the market will offer the individual supplier for each unit of output they deliver to market, then this is also called the individual demand curve. Sometimes we'll write it this way, D sub I. It's the individual demand curve as opposed to the market demand curve, which is over here. So that's the market demand curve. It's downward sloping, right? Market demand curve is downward sloping, but in perfect competition, the individual demand curve is horizontal. Okay? Now, so we're just looking here at the demand side of the profit maximizing problem, because presumably this farmer or whoever it is that wants to maximize profit. We're just looking at the demand side of their situation. And we're noting that the market will always pay $6 for each unit they deliver to market. Let me ask you something here though. What if, okay, so we have kind of a static picture here. What if, say, and we're using wheat again, so some news comes out about I'm not in the know on this stuff, I'm not a dietitian or anything, but this news comes out that eating wheat, can aggravate celiac disease and all that, And I was talking with someone this weekend about how many people now have celiac disease and so forth. I don't really even know what causes it. But just say, for instance, that news comes out about harmful effects associated with consuming wheat. The market's going to be affected first, right? Because how would the market, this is a review concept, but how would the market be affected here? One of these curves is going to shift, remember? Okay, obviously the demand curve is going to shift and to the left, right? Because there'll be a decreased demand. So the market demand curve is going to shift. Okay, I didn't draw that very well, but it's going to shift down here. Now guess what is going to happen to the individual demand for wheat facing the farmer? What do you think there? It's going to shift too, but downward, right? So now that curve's going to come down here. All right. So when you alter any of the determinants in the market over here, be it for supply or demand, you're going to alter the position of the individual demand curve. Okay, that's important. That's going to be important for us to see here just a little bit. In particular, we're going to use this fact. Okay, if we go back to our original situation, and this is a perfectly competitive industry. Which means, again, I wrote it somewhere here if I can find it, there are low barriers to entry or free entry and exit. Okay, free entry and exit. Okay, now let's think about this a second. Like, for instance, our parable we had the other day about the people at the post office quitting their job, $50,000 a year job to go into landscaping, right? Almost anybody can go into that. It's free entry, okay? You don't really have to have a license, I guess, or anything in a small town to do that kind of work, and kind of commercial off-the-shelf basic equipment you might use and so forth. So here's the deal. What if, because the current suppliers in the market are all enjoying profits, okay, economic profits. Remember last time we noted that if you have positive economic profits, that's going to lure other people into that industry. So if you have, for the typical landscaper, you have some positive economic profits, greater than zero, which is good. Then others at the post office are going to quit their job and go into this line of work. The market's going to be affected, and therefore also the individual supplier is going to be affected because of, again, the existence of positive economic profits that lure others into the industry. So what's the mechanism here? If you had positive economic profits in a market, this market's going to be affected, right? So one of these curves is going to shift. Which one? So people come in, they quit the job at the post office, they go into landscaping. So what side of this market's affected? supply. It's going to shift to the right, right? So instead of the demand shifting to the left like we had here, supply is going to shift to the right. Same thing here. This curve is going to shift downward. Guess what? The typical price that's going to be commanded by suppliers in that industry is going to go down. We know this is true. You know this from common sense. So as long as you have entry into the industry, then the price of the good or service offered by the industry is going to go down. Okay, we see that here. Okay, and it's, certainly if it's perfectly competitive. Yes, Riley.
It makes sense to me why the
Yes.
individual demand curve moves with the other curves and moves
Okay.
with the price. I'm just trying to reconcile the idea that it is horizontal and that makes it look like
Yeah.
individual demand. Like, to me, it looks like it represents the producer could produce however much, and as long as they produce more,
Right.
the more will be consumed. Like, however much is produced is what will be consumed if it's continually produced at that price, which doesn't make sense to me unless people,
Yeah.
I would think once people have enough widgets, they
Yeah.
stop liking widgets so much
Okay.
and they're not willing to pay for any more.
Yeah, I like that. So you expect that term from an old guy like me. Widgets, right? Okay, very good. That's good. So, no, okay. So I think what you're noting here, or you're questioning, why? How is it that an individual supplier at some point couldn't drive down the price? Is that what
Well, my question is because it's
Yeah.
like, I guess I'm a little confused about what individual demand represents. I think I
Okay.
missed part of your definition.
Oh, that's all right. I'll tell you what. Let me graph it this way. Let's see if I can answer that question, and I think I'm understanding your question by focusing in. Let's take a microscopic view of this, okay? Of the market first. Okay, really the picture is there because it's perfect competition. There are many suppliers. So if you took the biggest one in the world, wheat farmer, then the amount of wheat they deliver to market is just this much. Okay? It's just in the big scheme of things. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to draw a little band here around the equilibrium point. Okay? So this is, this is an exaggeration, but this is the biggest wheat farmer in the world. Okay, now if you lined up all the wheat farmers here by the, where this one's in the middle here, if they keep their wheat off the market, the price will be here at P max. If they farm all of their acreage, all million acres, I think it was 500,000 you did a while ago, right? This would be the minimum market price. So the idea here is that within this range, first off, you're still within what's called the relevant range for the market. Regardless, the idea is everybody's going to do what they're going to do. This one person here is not going to supply enough wheat to flood the market, nor to starve the market. But what we see is there's a price band here. That if this is Q max, let me use a.
Can't see all.
Okay, yeah. Oh, thank you. Here we go. If this is Q max, that's the maximum quantity that they can bring to market, and this is Q min, which is 0, then the individual demand curve really looks like this.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
That does, because that's
Okay.
what I was.
Okay.
I was looking at that like
Yeah.
it can't go straight forever.
Yeah, I can't. Not forever. No.
Okay, so there is a limit. It's just
Yeah,
negligible.
but it would never. This is the biggest one in the market, and their effect on the price is really negligible.
So this like P max and P min are probably values like $2.50 and $2.60.
But not even that much, probably. Probably a penny a bushel.
Okay.
Really, when you get right down to it, like if you're talking wheat, because they grow wheat around in Russia and so forth, millions and millions of bushels of wheat. So maybe the biggest guy in Nebraska could affect the price of wheat by a couple pennies a bushel, but
So I can I see that being like, it doesn't matter. I can produce more and more and more.
yeah.
Probably, if that makes any impact on the market, someone else is producing less and less and less.
Yeah, actually though.
If that even happens.
Yeah, if it did, you'd have to gobble up a lot of other farms. It's not going to. Then you move from a different market structure.
Okay.
Okay, so it's almost. This is one of the defining characteristics of perfect competition is that the biggest supplier is still a little guy. So if the biggest supplier becomes a big guy, has significant market share, then you move out of perfect competition. And you get more into perhaps monopolistic competition and so forth that if we have time we'll look at.
Also, if I understood your question correctly, a more like grounded approach, like non-graphical, would be like the farmers are wholesalers.
As soon as they sell their product, it's considered consumed, basically. for
That's
them.
true.
And so even if it doesn't get used, and it's like the wheat, whatever gets turned into even, gets thrown away, like it's still consumed. It's gone, it's used up. It can't be,
Yeah.
it's not eaten or whatever.
Do
Yeah,
that. Also just.
yeah, in that sense too, they're price takers, aren't they? In space, they just, so yeah, I mean, yeah, if you got down here on the microscopic scale, but again, if you had this situation here, that biggest wheat farmer could be placed there, then you're no longer in perfect competition. And then you begin to, you have some, I'm trying to think of the term, I'll think of it later. Oh, market concentration, okay, is the term, market concentration. When you get in that, now obviously if you had someone like this, then this person would be pretty powerful, wouldn't they? Because they could affect the price of wheat. And so in other market structures, you have what's called market concentration. Here you basically have none. And market concentration can be defined this way. You can take the market shares of each supplier and square them and add them up. So you take the percentages like, you know, this is 1%, and you square it, you get 1% of 1%. And you do that for everybody, add it up, you get a number. But the thing is, the lower that number, the more concentrated or the less concentrated the market is. The higher the number, the more concentrated. So we're going to look at that later, okay? I'm jumping ahead, probably shouldn't, but we're going to talk about market concentration in the next chapter when we look at less competitive market structures. But the federal government watches that, Department of Justice in particular, and FTC, but mostly the Department of Justice will keep that number, they'll calculate that for lots of industries. And most industries they don't care about, but certain ones they look at, like in telecom and so forth, and they don't want one person to get too big, okay, because it's considered to be not good for the consumer. All right, so we have here again the demand side of the market as it faces the individual supplier. So the main thing is there's one curve here, okay, that represents both the price, marginal revenue, and average revenue. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put things together from the previous chapter and this chapter. Okay, so I want to draw the market. I'm sorry, the individual supplier here in perfect competition. All right, so I'm going to put some curves on here, and y'all tell me what these are. Okay, I want to put this curve, I want to put this curve, and I'm going to put this curve like that. Those look familiar? Okay, so I mentioned last time you need to learn these curves here. I'm going to put Q here, price here. All right, there's basically three U-shaped curves. What's this one right here? Does anyone know? What's that curve? Goes through the minimum of two other curves. We were just talking about that? There you go. That's called marginal cost, right? Marginal cost. All right, and the two U-shaped curves are average cost. So this is the ATC, average total cost curve, and this is the average variable cost curve. Does that look familiar, class? Okay, so this is, let me just jog our gray matter here a little bit. This is 3 of the 4 curves they have on page 279 of your text. So that was the focus in the previous chapter of cost of production. So maybe you got a small-time furniture maker here that's in competition with lots of other furniture makers around the world. By the way, if you want to buy furniture, a certain kind today, go out on the internet and get your best deals. Highly competitive now. Used to not be so, but the internet has made things much more competitive. But say if this is a furniture maker here, then these 3 costs are very important in production. Okay, you have increasing marginal cost here beyond some point, and you have increasing average cost of production because of diminishing returns to labor or whatever your variable input is. Okay, all right, so I'm going to put those on there. Okay, so this is the cost side of the market, or the cost side for the individual supplier, okay, as they face the market. The demand side is that curve right there. See, I put D sub I here, which also equals the marginal revenue and the average revenue, total revenue or average revenue. Your book uses AR, okay, average revenue. Should be, yeah. Okay, there's the demand and the supply side as far as the individual supplier goes of the market, as far as they're concerned. Okay? All right, so let's, any questions on that? Class dismissed? No. Does this make sense? Anything here I got here doesn't make sense? Okay. All right. So here's something here. These 2 curves here, when the individual supplier wants to answer the question, let's just write it here. What is the profit maximizing? That's what we want to do if we're in a capitalistic society. We want to maximize profits, right? So what is the profit maximizing level of output? Okay? Now, do you think somebody cares about that question? Is somebody going to pay you to answer that? You bet they will, right? If you're a furniture maker, and these are short-run cost curves. Remember, these are all your short-run cost curves here. In the short run, the manager makes decisions. The owners of capital make the decisions in the long run. But these are managerial decisions. The managerial decision is, okay, this week, how many of those chairs there should I make? Okay, how many should we make and bring to market? Well, these curves are all relevant. In particular, these 2 right here. Because there is a rule that you want to look to determine the profit maximizing output level is to satisfy here marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You want marginal revenue to equal marginal cost. Okay? Why is that? Because you'll notice here marginal cost in this situation increases, right? And marginal revenue is constant. So first off, let's just identify where that is. This is where the 2 curves intersect. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put a Q star here. That's your profit maximizing output. I'll put Q star there. That's a special level of output for this individual supplier, okay? Individual supplier, not the market, but the individual supplier. All these are individual curves. These are individual cost curves. That's the individual demand curve. So the claim here is that to maximize profit, you want to satisfy this very special relationship here. So this little thing here is kind of like, I mean, if you're a really hardcore economist and you want to tattoo an economics law on your body somewhere, this is it. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If you're a physicist, maybe it's E equals MC squared. I don't know. But it's a very conspicuous, a very salient, very important, conspicuous rule we refer to a lot. Now, why is this? Okay, first off, we don't, in fact, I think we built this table out. Let me look real quick. Yeah, let's just look at, remember just a moment ago we were building a table like this here on table 1 on page 289, where we're computing total revenue and so forth. So here's our total revenue. Let's go right here just a second. Same situation, gallons of milk, okay. Total revenue is $6 a gallon, right? So 2 gallons is 12, revenue for 3 is 18. Now notice they put some cost curves on here. We just now looked at this column, we looked at this column, and we looked at, they don't have the average revenue column on here. We don't need it for what I'm about to show you. Okay, that's why they didn't put it on here. But we looked at these 2 columns in the previous diagram. All right, so this is kind of from the demand side. Now you'll notice here you got some cost curves. You got total cost here. So what's going on here? Okay, the total cost of producing 0 units is $3. You know what you call that? That's called the fixed cost. That's the cost that kicks in before you produce any output. This is the cost. Maybe this is a cost per hour or something. I don't know the unit of time, but it's a unit of time. There's a fixed rental cost, say, on equipment. Whether you use the equipment or not, $3 an hour. Boom, right there, $3. Okay? So it's built into all of these things. So you'll notice if you go to quantity of 1, the total cost is 5 units. Why? Because there's a fixed cost of 3 buried in here somewhere and a variable cost of 2. All right. So you'll notice here, this number 2 over here in the marginal cost column. That's the difference between these 2 numbers right here. 2 divided by the change in quantity. So you remember marginal cost, here's the rule, is change in total cost divided by change in quantity. So it's 5 minus 3 over 1, which is $2. So total cost here obviously continues to go up. It always costs more to produce more, okay? There's no mystery there about that pattern. But when you compute marginal cost over here, notice, okay, this particular one doesn't show up very well, but it actually goes down for a little bit, typically, okay? We've talked about why ManQ doesn't do this, but the thing is, inevitably in the short run, these numbers have to go up. Notice how they go up. At some point, they never go back down, right? Now, why is that? Marginal cost is an increasing function of output beyond some point. Why is that? Because of the law of what? Diminishing returns. Okay, boom, that's it. Law of diminishing returns. So the thing is, we looked at that, how you have diminishing returns to a variable input necessitates then increasing marginal cost. Those are 2 sides of the same coin, okay? 2 sides of the same coin. If you hire an additional worker to increase output, but you get some bang out of that worker, but less than you did from the previous worker, okay? So you're experiencing their diminishing marginal product, then the output that's produced by your workers is going to come at incrementally larger cost, right? So whatever, if they're producing chairs, keep using that, those chairs on a per unit basis are getting more and more expensive. Each additional chair is more expensive than the one before it. So you have increasing marginal cost because of diminishing marginal product. And so we see that. It's always the case. So that's why this curve here slopes up. That's why we have it drawn the way we have it drawn. Okay? Now, they've got some other things here, but what I want you to see from this diagram, or see if you can figure out just from the numbers in this chart, this supplier should produce at what level? Okay? That's the question that the owners of the business want to know. Or certainly even lower than that, the manager who makes output decisions or decides how many workers to employ, they need some data like this to determine how many workers to employ to generate output. So the question here is very real world. What level of output should this worker or should this plant produce at? What do you think? Any ideas? What is it we want to do? What's the objective? Maximize what? Profit. We know we want to maximize profit, right? I mean, everybody. So you look at this, And you might look at this column right here, profit, right? And you go down here and you go, wow. It goes up to $7 and goes back down to $6. Somewhere in this range. Somewhere 4 or 5 or something between. If you can't produce half of a chair, maybe you can produce half of a gallon, I don't know. But somewhere in this range right here. Okay, notice what's going on in this range right here. If you look at marginal revenue and marginal cost, how are they related? They're equal. This will always happen. You see, for levels of output less than, this is the profit, I want to put it right here, Q star is in here, right? Is between 4 and 5. For levels of output less than Q star, I'm just going to write in my book, I'm going to put an inequality sign like this. See that? Marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Okay? For levels of output greater than Q star, I'm reflecting, and it goes the other way, right? Marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue. Now we see that in our diagram right here. The claim here is this is maybe 4.5. Okay, it's between 4 and 5, so I'll say 4.5. Between 0 and 4.5, the marginal revenue exceeds the marginal cost. So if we produce only 3 units over here, then what you're going to see is that the marginal revenue and the marginal cost are related this way. Marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Isn't that true here in our diagram? Got that inequality going this way. 6 is greater than 4 on that third unit. So this is like 4, and this is 6. Now, you don't want to just stop production in a week when you made 3, well in this case it's gallons, maybe it's 3,000 gallons, or whatever the unit of time is, remember, it's a finite unit of time. So maybe it's a day, maybe it's an hour, it doesn't really matter. So if it's an hour, you don't want to stop at just 3 units per hour. You want to produce more than that. Because if you go to the next unit, which is 4, it also has marginal revenue greater than marginal cost. Maybe a smaller spread here, but there's still a spread. And as long as there's a spread on each unit you increment output by, you will be increasing what? Profit. Okay, let me put the numbers on this one. Okay, so at 4 they got it the same here. So let me go back to 2. We can do the same thing here. 2, and at 2 units, the marginal cost is 3. Here we go. Why do I not want to stop at 2 units per hour, 2 gallons per hour? Why would I want to advance if I'm doing 2, if I've already done 2 in an hour, I say, do I want to produce 1 more gallon this hour? I'll want to advance from 2 to 3. Why? Because I'm going to add this little distance here to my profit. Okay, what is profit? Profit is the difference between revenue and cost, and you're experiencing that on each unit here. Let's see, the first unit has a marginal revenue of doesn't really matter what the units are. $2, I think. So if I go here to 1, this is $2. Okay? So do you see what's happening is at low levels of output less than that which corresponds to equality here between marginal cost and marginal revenue. Each of these units here contribute to profit. So there's one of our 10 economic principles we learned in the first chapter. It says that rational people think on the margin. In particular, economists think on the margin. That is to say, if I want to find out, where should I produce here to maximize profit, I really don't have to generate this whole table here. I don't have to have a global view of the whole situation. I just answered this question. I say, wherever I am now, should I increase output or decrease output? And if I'm accustomed to producing 3 units per hour, then I should look at now producing 4 units per hour. because I'm going to get a little more bang for my buck here to add to profit. Okay, it's a little easier here going from 2 to 3 perhaps. From the second unit, the marginal profit is the difference between the marginal revenue, which is 6, and the marginal cost, which is 3. You could call that marginal profit. The marginal profit on the second unit here is 6 minus 3, $3. $3, marginal profit. MP, I guess. It's positive. Anytime that marginal profit is positive, that means the marginal revenue exceeds the marginal cost. It means produce one more unit. Now the marginal profit on the next unit is $2. So we added to our total profit by this amount, $2, when we increment output up from 2 to 3. Y'all see that? That makes sense? So I'm thinking on the margin, really, okay? It's like I don't go back and work the whole problem over. I think about where I am, where am I standing presently. And it's almost like, I don't know, like standing on a hillside and you want to go to the top of the hill. You don't have to walk down the hill and look at the whole hill to figure out where and look, you just, the next step going up is this way, okay? I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense or not, but we see here that wherever I am on this side of this intersection point makes sense to advance or increment up my level of output because I'm going to add to total profit. What if I'm over here? If I'm producing more output than Q star, okay? Should I produce then more output in the next unit of time or less? Can you tell? That's right, less. So maybe I'm producing 6, okay? That means the marginal cost exceeds the marginal revenue. Oh, that's cutting into profits, right? So the marginal profit here on the 5th unit, I guess this would be the 6th unit here. On this unit, the marginal cost is marginal profit is a -1. They call it just change in profit, but it's marginal profit. Marginal profit's -1. Okay, because again, the marginal cost exceeds the marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue. So here you should step back, okay? Should step back. All right, so this, I don't know how obvious this is, but it's profound, okay? In that, by the way, the great discoveries in history, human history, and later you look back and go, well, duh, yeah, that's simple, that makes sense. But at the time, they altered the course of history, okay? Sometimes the most profound discoveries are the simplest, okay? This is one of those, okay? I guess when Newton was sitting under that apple tree and apple fell and hit him on the head, that's another example. I mean, that's kind of a silly one perhaps, but he discovered from that there's an inverse square law that we use to model gravitational attraction. It's called the law of universal gravitation. Yes, Seth, which is simple.
When did they figure this out then? If it's so
This is part of what's called the marginalist school of economics. There's different schools, if you will, areas of economic study, and this comes from what's called the marginalist school. To be honest, I don't know. I don't have a particular name. I'm sure there is one. Of an economist that first wrote about this. I'm sure there is one, but I don't know who it would be. You could probably Google that and find it out. It's a good question. Now, this is a pretty simple diagram, right? But when we get later into, say, a situation where the individual supplier supplies to the whole market, by the way, they call that a monopoly, then this individual demand curve slopes downward. And they may have the same cost curves, but this idea of locating the profit maximizing quantity and price is a little more complicated problem. Here it's really simple. The profit maximizing quantity looks to be 4.5 units. And so how do you achieve that? Okay, well, this producer should bring 4.5 units to market and charge $6. And they'll get the profit maximizing revenue. What's that going to be? That's the area of this rectangle. That whole rectangle. 6 times 4.5, which I think is what, $27. would be the profit maximizing revenue. Okay, revenue. Okay, so let's look at this just a second, okay? Okay, thank you. Let's look at that just a little second. We're going to look at this diagram. I'm going to sketch this real quickly again. Let's just look at this. Okay, so you know these three curves, cost curves, and you know the individual demand curve. So I'm going to slap these on here. Remember, both average curves are U-shaped, but they converge to the right. Marginal cost, again, goes to the minimum. So this is marginal cost, this is average total cost, this is average variable cost. So those you should know by now. Okay, so let me just draw this curve across here. And this is the individual demand, which gives you the price the individual supplier is going to sell each quantity Q. Okay, all right. Okay, so first off, I may not shade all this in, but this rectangle here, where this is sitting over Q star, is the profit maximizing revenue. Profit max revenue. Okay, so here's what I want you to be able to do. I can put this on a test, okay? Put some numbers on here. But I want you to be able to find these things. Like if this is $6 and this is 4.5 units here, and got some other things listed here. But if I say, what's the profit maximizing revenue? You multiply these two things together, right? So this is $6 times 4.5 units. And I think this is $27. Profit maximizing revenue, $27, okay? What is the profit? What is the maximum profit? Anybody got a notion how we could find that graphically here?
Would it be, it's going to be where average total cost intersects our quantity line, and at that point over to the...
Very good. Man, you're so good. That's right. You saw that point right here, right? Mm-hmm. So here's your average total cost curve, average total cost. Mm-hmm. And here's the output you're going to be producing at. So this rectangle here is total cost, all right? Because that's, the height is average total cost. So the way I got it here, it kind of brushes right above that. But here you go. That is the total cost. The total cost is this rectangle. So I look at the average total cost curve. I don't know if I have it on here. I've got it on the previous diagram here. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. Well, they don't have this filled in on this diagram I was wanting to use. But at any rate, it's that area there. Let me put a number there. So total cost here, 4.5. Looks to be 17 and 20. So say it's $20, okay? That's not cool. 20, and then 20 divided by 4.5. I'm doing this reverse here, which is a dangerous thing to do, but I want to make the point. 20 divided by 4.5. So it's going to be close to 4.4, okay? So this is $4.40. What if that's $4.40? Okay. So total cost will be the product of these two. $4.40 times 4.5 units, right? That's the total cost, which is going to help us find total profit. So this is 19.8. Let me slide this over here. Okay, so that's this rectangle. So the profit is what? You see it, right? It's this rectangle. It's the big rectangle, subtract the little rectangle. Okay, so here this looks to be $7.20. Just using my numbers here, but that would be the area of this. This is the profit. This rectangle here is total cost. And all of this is the total revenue at the optimal level of output. Okay. Okay.
Because the average total cost is above the average variable, is it assumed that you already took out the cost of the average variable?
Okay, good question. Let's look at that. Okay, you're going a little deeper in the diagram, which is very important. Total cost. Total cost has two parts to it, right? Has total fixed cost and total variable cost. Okay, so if I come down to the average variable cost curve, and I draw a line across here, this rectangle here is average variable cost times quantity. So what would be the area of this rectangle here? Total variable cost. Okay? So I look at the average variable cost curve at the profit maximizing output. And I don't know what that is. We just put a number in there. It really doesn't matter. Let's just suppose it's $3. Okay? So if this vertical line, which is so important, we noted first, where the marginal cost intersects the marginal revenue curve. Okay? I should have put marginal revenue on here. This is not only the demand, it's the marginal revenue. Again, it's also the price. And it's also the average revenue curve. So we first intersected these two, determine this quantity. Now you look up to the average variable cost curve, take its height, note its height, we're going to say it's $3. Multiply the height by the length, you'll get the total variable cost. So the total variable cost, this thing here, is $3 times 4.5. Okay, which is what, 13.5? 13.5. I should have labeled this up here. What's this $7.20? That's total profit, right? I said it but didn't write it. All right, so total variable cost is a portion of the total cost. If we go back up here and look at total cost, and if I subtract total variable cost from it, I could get total fixed cost. More than one way to do this, I suppose. But the total variable cost here is $13.50. Total cost is $19.80. So the difference between those would be $6.30 is the total fixed cost. Does that make sense, class? Okay. All right, so.
So it is assumed we were going to take it out of it.
Yeah, so what is this rectangle here?
That is, I don't know.
This is your total fixed cost. This one here's your total variable cost. Put them together, it gives you a total cost. Okay?
They're just stacked together.
Do what?
They're just stacked together.
They're just stacked there, right. So sometimes we'll shade them different colors like this. This would be the total fixed cost, total variable cost, stack profit on top of that. Okay, and that's got to equal your total revenue. Yes.
So why do we draw the average variable cost curve so often?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, why do we care about the average variable cost? Okay, here's something, okay? And I want to end with this point here. Okay, if you have a business, a factory, and you've already rented your machines and floor space, you've incurred what's called a fixed cost. There's nothing you can do about it, okay? And suddenly the price of your output's gone down so that your profits have not only, this thing's gone down, this line's gone down, not only, it's gone below $4.40. Can you imagine? Remember the supply and demand curve shifting? And maybe this comes down here. And you'll see that your profit's negative. Does it make sense to still operate? It does. It makes sense in the short run to operate so long as you can receive a price that exceeds minimum average variable cost. Because if you do, your revenues will cover all of your variable cost and a portion of your fixed cost.